Okay, folks, as I promised, another review on a movie Alcatraz based. The Birdman of Alcatraz, starring Burt Lancaster, directed by John Frankenheimer. This movie has a 2 hour and 27-minute runtime. It came out in 1962, a year before the Alcatraz prison was closed by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and I believe the prison was only 30 years old at the time. Huge waste of taxpayer money, if you ask me. That being said, this movie is filmed in glorious black and white, and that does add to the performance. This is considered the breakout role for Tally Savalas. He plays a guy named, I believe, Feo Gomez. Excellent performance. This is a fictionalized account about a real life guy named Robert Stroud. And I guess you can call this a Hollywood propaganda film because there was really a guy named the Birdman of Alcatraz. But in actuality, this movie should have been called The Birdman of Leavenworth because he was there in prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, at the federal prison for over 30 years. This guy, the Robert Stroud character that Lancaster plays, I kind of went down a rabbit hole reading about him. He was convicted of murder for killing a bartender in Alaska that was beaten up on one of his ladies of the evening. That's right, he was a pimp, and he killed this bartender that was beaten up on one of the women in his stable. And he would have been around 19 years old at the time, so he had been in prison pretty much from the age of 19 until his death at the age of 72. So he pretty much spent the majority of his adult life in prison, and he was only supposed to go into prison for around 12 years. And then he was transferred from a prison on an island in Washington to Leavenworth because he had bad behavior. And there he stabbed and killed a prison guard. And they kind of show a progression of the person in the movie where he becomes this docile guy dedicated to the study of preserving birds by making medicines and just a real genuine type of guy. That is not what the real life Robert Stroud was like, according to biographers. He was more like a sociopathic killer, Ted Bundy, than the mild-mannered person that they portrayed as his character progressed in the movie. Psychiatrists from the prison system labeled him as a brilliant psychopath. And he was a master manipulator, and one of the reasons they ended up moving him to Alcatraz from Leavenworth, where he had his huge bird aviary in his jail cell, is he did not want to conform to any of the prison rules that had been instituted as they started to really federalize the prison system and kind of give this uniform standard. You couldn't have animals in a prison. They say his cell was disgusting and unhygienic, and a part of his deception that the Prison Bureau alleged was that he was making these medicines for birds under the guise that was his kind of ploy, but he was using all these chemicals to make alcohol and had his own still. And he just kind of basically treated the prison system like they were his servants and would do his bidding to feed his interest of birds. But he was a genius. He did develop certain cures to birds that was attributed to him. People in the bird world loved him, and they petitioned for his release. But that's kind of where the movie reality, there's like a definite line there that I could tell. So anyway, this movie was adapted from a 1955 book of the same name, written by a guy named Tom Gaddis, who was actually featured in the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie. The soundtrack score by composer Elmer Bernstein, who was prolific in the era. The film was originally to be directed by a British director named Charles Crichton, but he didn't get along well with Burt Lancaster, so then he was replaced by John Frankenheimer. The film was heavily scrutinized by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as they stated it wasn't their policy to let convicts be glamorized, and they felt that the movie was unfair in its depiction of the real-life person. Lancaster had to dedicate 8 months to the making of this movie. And again, he chose to portray the Stroud person as a mild-mannered person, which everyone says is not true representation of who he really was. He had this weird relationship with his mom where he was originally supposed to be hung by the neck until he was dead for the murder of that prison guard, and his mother petitioned the president, and they ended up giving a stay on his execution and life in solitary confinement instead. And his relationship with his mother would only run until he met another bird aficionado, some woman from Indiana. I didn't write her name down. They developed this relationship, pen pal relationship. And basically, since he was pretty much a genius, he stayed his departure from Leavenworth because they wanted to do that in the early 30s. And he was studying all the laws of the state of Kansas that a prisoner couldn't be transferred if he was married. So he did a courtroom marriage to this woman. His mother was furious that he had married this woman, kind of like picking one woman over his maternal relationship. And that was the last time they ever spoke until her death. And after that, she was no longer her son's champion to get out of prison or save him from any type of harm. She basically cut him off and told the parole board that he deserved to never be released. And that was the last time that they ever spoke. And in the feature film, there is a very poignant scene where he feels betrayed. The Lancaster character, you see the betrayal by his mother. He burns her photograph. So, interesting movie. The black and white really adds to it. If you're viewing it as just kind of this Hollywood fiction based on a real life character, it is an interesting movie. I don't know. I would like to learn more about the real life guy. He had a very interesting life since he spent the most of his adult life in prison. He was very well read. I would love to read his unpublished book. This is another interesting thing where it's like, okay, the federal government kind of blurs the lines of their misrepresentation, right? And I feel like we see that now more than ever, where the government doesn't want anyone speaking out against them. He wrote a detailed book about the prison system, and the FBI did not like the way that it portrayed the prison system, so they shelved his book. And to this day, in over 50 plus years, only partial portions of it have been released. There's never been the full version of his book released that supposedly heavily scrutinizes the prison system. So maybe all those stories about him being a sociopath and whatnot are just total fabrications by the prison system to miscredit him. I don't know. This movie is definitely a social commentary on the injustice of prison, because if you even see the Lancaster character pairing up against the warden, who was portrayed by another brilliant actor, Carl Malden. The movie that I know of offhand where Carl Malden is excellent is he plays a minister in the movie Pollyanna, the Disney movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But they're kind of these enemies where they're facing off through the whole movie, as Malden plays the warden at the prison in Leavenworth, and then later on he plays the final warden that you see him underneath at Alcatraz. So you see there's a brilliant scene where Malden's character is confiscating this manuscript that scrutinizes the prison system and recidivism, how there is no real reform from the prison system. And apparently the Stroud book kind of highlighted that, and the government didn't like it. To this day, you've never seen the full version of that book. So, and again, this movie is showing that this guy deserved to be released and dedicate the rest of his life to the study of birds, but he ended up dying in prison at the age of 72. He never saw freedom. And this movie definitely was a social commentary about the injustice that prisoners face. On the other side of the coin, is capital punishment right? He killed 2 people, and then he just gets to spend the rest of his life dedicating his life to the study of birds as his character progressed from this kind of maniacal guy to just falling in love with canaries and other type of birds. I don't know. I'm not going to say one way or the other. This channel is apolitical. I'm not taking sides. It's a great movie. Let's get into the ratings here, and we'll wrap up this review because I'm running a little bit long. The Rotten Tomato critic average is 88%. The audience average, with over 5,000 user reviews, 85%. IMDb 7.8 out of 10, and this is another 5 out of 5. I remember watching this movie on Turner Classic Movies growing up on cable, and liking it then. So I had seen it before, full disclosure. This isn't my first watch. But again, I'm just kind of tying back into the theme of Trump trolling everybody, saying he wants to reopen Alcatraz. Very disingenuous for them to call this movie The Birdman of Alcatraz, because of when he was moved to Alcatraz, once again, they moved him there to take him away from all of his birds. It should have been called The Birdman of Leavenworth. He spent about 10 years in Alcatraz and ended up dying at a prison farm in Missouri. So that's the review. We had back-to-back 5 out of 5 prison-based movies. Until next time, thanks for watching. We'll see you then. And I'm going to try and find my copy of The Rock. So that will be the trifecta of Alcatraz movies that I wanted to talk about. We'll see you then, folks.